Now, as has kind of become the tradition in the months before the release of a new Star Wars movie, today Vanity Fair released their issue with all sorts of images and tidbits of information about the upcoming film Star Wars Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker. And though there was some cool and interesting stuff in there, stuff to get excited about like having it confirmed that the Knights of Ren will play a role in Episode 9, not to mention getting to see a picture of them in broad daylight, there was also some things in there that raised an eyebrow and had me a bit concerned. All in all, to be honest with you, there really wasn't a ton of new information, or things that hadn't already been previously leaked or speculated to be strong possibilities. And so in this video, I'll just briefly give you my thoughts on a few things from it, and as usual, I'll be as honest as I can be with all of you and tell you the good and the bad from my point of view, and then invite you to give me your thoughts in the comments below, so we can talk some Star Wars. Okay, so as you may know if you follow my videos, one of my biggest gripes with the sequel trilogy is that it really hasn't offered anything new to the story. In many ways, it's just rehashing the previous two trilogies, compressed into one trilogy. For example, in this new trilogy, the New Republic and the Jedi Order have fallen, like we saw in the prequels when the Old Republic and the original Jedi Order fell. And now, like in the original trilogy, we're down to one lone hero, Rey this time instead of Luke, and they must rise up and defeat the dark side and re-establish the Jedi Order once more while a ragtag rebellion, or in this case, the Resistance, has to defeat the First Order instead of the Empire this time. In other words, this is the same story in a slightly different package, and as I've also said many times before, what this trilogy needed to do was justify its own existence or find a reason for a once finished story to now continue. Which wasn't all that hard to do if you consider the prequels, again, were the fall of the Jedi Order and the Republic, and the original trilogy was the fight to restore both of them, and then the sequels could have easily been about testing both of these returned or re-established factions or organizations with a whole new threat. And then when both prevailed in the end, we could assume that they would go on for another 1,000 generations, like the previous Republic and Jedi Order did, according to Obi-Wan in A New Hope. But then I read quotes like this one from the article about how the young generation has to deal with the debt of the previous one, and you realize just how bad they've completely missed the mark with what they should have done with this trilogy. Because that's exactly what the last trilogy, or the original trilogy, was all about. It showed how the then current generation had to deal with and fix the mistakes of the old. They were the heroes that fixed everything and put it right until, with this new story or new trilogy, they decided to undo all of that off-screen. And so if you actually wanted a complete and coherent story and weren't maybe more interested in sending covert messages, and I'll get to more on that in a moment, what this new generation should be doing right now is trying to maintain and secure what the last generation gave everything to achieve, not fixing the mistakes that they didn't actually make other than, again, the ones that apparently happened off-screen in the gap between movies. I look at it this way. Luke, the son of the betrayer Anakin Skywalker, helped redeem his father and brought back the Jedi Order his father had destroyed. And then you had Leia, daughter of the betrayer Anakin Skywalker. She helped lead a rebellion against the Empire her father helped command. It's a fantastic story that gets completely undone for the sake of telling pretty much the same story all over again, though in a less coherent and interesting way, and with nowhere near as well developed or compelling characters. And no, I'm not trying to be negative here, because believe me when I say I want to love this trilogy, and especially this last movie that'll cap it off. But then I read quotes like this one about how Obi-Wan died in vain, which is true since Luke failed and that's who he gave his life for, and how it's all a little less of a fairy tale now. Well, I can't help but feel like that should say it's all a little less of a good story now and misses the original point of Star Wars. Because, and they actually mention some of this right in the article, one of the reasons Lucas created Star Wars in the first place was to bring hope back to people in a time when they were losing it, back in the 70s after the Vietnam War, and faith in the government was at an all-time low thanks to scandals like Watergate. And movies of the time were all too often dark and dreary and filled with anti-heroes, and sci-fi movies had a strange fascination with apocalyptic scenarios. And then the first Star Wars movie came along in 1977, and it gave everyone something to love and actually cheer for. It didn't divide people, it brought them together. And when I hear crazy rumors, or what I very much hope are crazy rumors, about how Episode 9 is going to be a subtle, or maybe not so subtle, attack on Donald Trump that's going to be all about finding some message Luke Skywalker recorded, calling for people to rise up and fight fascism, or in this case, in the movie, The First Order, I literally cringe in fear for what this movie could be. And it didn't help alleviate my fears when I read this quote from J.J. Abrams, especially what he says towards the end of it about how it's less about grandeur, it's less about restoring in old age, It's more about preserving a sense of freedom and not being one of the oppressed. And maybe I'm crazy, and I really, really hope I am, but that almost sounds a little too on the nose. It's almost like him saying, it's not about making America great again, which is, of course, a slogan of Donald Trump's. And look, I don't want to talk about politics here, and you likely didn't click on this video to hear me talk about them either. The same way, I don't want to go to a Star Wars movie and be fed politics. And I don't care if Hollywood elites love or hate Donald Trump, nor do I care how anybody else feels about the guy. Sure, I have my own opinions on him, but who really cares about that besides me? Just like I don't care what their opinions are. I just want a good Star Wars movie. And that's what a vast, vast majority, if not pretty much all Star Wars fans want too. And I'm not saying it absolutely will be, because there's every chance these rumors about this being a political message are dead wrong. And if you have no idea what I'm talking about right now, that's probably a good thing. All I know is I don't want a Star Wars movie that pushes anyone's political agenda. I want one that, like the original Star Wars movie, is a story anybody and everybody can just get behind and enjoy and be inspired by. I want one that tries to bring the fan base together at this point, not one that a lot of people will hate if you infuse it with a political message. But at a couple different points in this article, they talk about how Star Wars has to grow and be cognizant of the world as it is today, which is exactly right. Wake up and realize that everything now tries to divide us, and you could go against the norm. You could subvert our expectations and be something that tries to unite us, like this franchise once did. Okay, my apologies for that. I'm done talking politics, I promise. I didn't want to go there in the first place, and I really hope the movie doesn't either. Anyway, getting back to it, there was yet another quote from this article that drew kind of a sigh for me as well. This time it was about how this movie will be, at long last, bringing an end to the age-old conflict between the Jedi and Sith. And I couldn't help but think to myself, you mean like how Return of the Jedi did that oh so brilliantly many years ago. And so now you're going to end this thousands of years old conflict using Rey, who has virtually no formal Jedi training and has learned everything from a set of books, I would imagine, who will then battle against Kylo Ren, who isn't a real Sith. What a great way to end the Jedi and Sith conflict after all this time. Glad you think Return of the Jedi's resolution to it wasn't good enough. But oh wait, that's right, they're bringing Palpatine back because they realized they didn't have a real villain for the story outside of Kylo Ren, who can't beat Rey, our main protagonist, and it'd be hard to wrap up this conflict between Sith and Jedi without an actual Sith. Oh, and don't worry, the article also assured us that Rey has come a long way in her Jedi training, to the point where she is now almost a full-fledged Jedi. Oh, and that she'll also be even more confident and sure of herself in this final movie. Okay, and now let's try to look at some of the positives here, and at some of the other little pieces of information we learned. Again, the Knights of Ren are back, but that was one of those things that felt like a given considering they were J.J. Abrams' creation and Rian Johnson ignored them in Episode 8, other than implying maybe they were what's left of Luke's students that sided with Ben when he turned. Either way, it'll be nice to potentially see them in action instead of just standing around in the rain, looking menacing. Abrams then talked again about how he wants to use more practical effects, and took a bit of a shot at George Lucas for going heavy CGI and green screen in the prequels, even though one of Lucas's goals with the prequels was to help usher in the digital age of film, which he did. That being said, yes, I am a fan of using more practical effects for the reasons Abrams brought up in the article, that it's almost impossible to perfectly duplicate with a computer what a camera can catch when really there and with what's actually being filmed. Abrams also talked more about how he wants to tie all three trilogies together with this film, yet still have it stand alone. And though I'm happy about hearing that all previous parts of the story are being considered, I'd actually be fine if they went the endgame route and didn't worry so much about making a movie that could stand on its own, and instead just focused on capping off this story. It was again awesome to see Lando on the Falcon, and I hope they do his character justice and don't needlessly kill him off and again piss off a bunch of fans. Keri Russell's character named Zori Bliss also looks pretty cool, and I still think there's a chance she ends up being Rey's mom, though how that could or would serve the story I couldn't say at this moment. We also got to look at Richard E. Grant's character, named Allegiant General Pride, and no, he's not the father of General Hux as some were speculating, even though those who follow the rest of the canon would already know that Brendel Hux, who is the father of Armitage Hux, is long since dead. Then there's this cool looking photo of Luke standing next to R2 and surrounded by fire, which at first I assumed had to be yet another flashback to when Ben burnt down Luke's new Jedi Temple, and not that he will be coming back to life in the flesh. But then I quickly realized Luke looks too old for that to be a flashback, considering if it was, he should look the same way he did in that flashback in The Last Jedi, to when he and Ben Solo had their little thing. We also got the name of 2 new planets, the first being the desert planet Pasana, which I think many people thought was either going to be Jakku or Jeddah, and the other a snow-dusted planet called Kijimi. And yes, I'm probably pronouncing both those names wrong. Also, apparently Poe is going to have risen to a leadership role in the Resistance. Rose and her place in the story was hardly even mentioned, and C-3PO is going to have an expanded role in this movie, which I guess could mean he'll be using Chewie's bowcaster, which was hinted at in that apparently fake teaser poster from a while back, which might not be so fake, but rather something they decided not to use after it came out early. Again, all in all here, a few little pieces of interesting information, but nothing I would deem major, and there were some quotes that made me a little nervous when I really just want to be hopeful. I want to believe that after all the issues with the first 2 movies, especially The Last Jedi and how it divided the fan base, that they would try to make a movie that avoids any sort of political message or controversy, one that is truly about family like they claim in this article, and begins to reunite the fan base. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you think about this news and information that dropped today. Has it made you any more or less excited for Episode 9? Let me know what you think in the comments below, and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.